I never imagined that the moment my life would begin to fall apart would look so ordinary. It was late at night. The house was quiet, except for the soft sound of breathing coming from the small bed beside mine. My twins were asleep, curled up like tiny commas, their faces calm and innocent. I sat there watching them, my hands resting on my knees, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't silence. The room felt heavy, like the air itself was pressing down on my chest. Earlier that day, the doctor had looked at me with a seriousness I couldn't ignore. He didn't rush his words, he didn't soften them either. "You need surgery," he said. "Soon. Delaying it will only make things more dangerous." I nodded, pretending I understood everything, pretending I wasn't scared. But the truth was, my fear had nothing to do with the surgery itself. I had survived pain before. I had survived abandonment, loneliness, and disappointment. What terrified me was the thought of leaving my children behind, even for a short time, without anyone who truly cared for them. Their father had walked out years ago. No warning, no goodbye, just silence. At first, I waited for him to come back, to call, to ask about the kids, but days turned into months and months into years. Eventually, I stopped waiting. That night, as I watched my twins sleep, one question kept repeating in my head. Who will take care of them if I can't? There was only one answer that made sense. My parents. They had always talked about family like it was sacred. They preached about responsibility, about sticking together in hard times. Growing up, they never missed a chance to remind me that blood was thicker than anything else. So, with shaking hands, I picked up my phone and called my mother. She answered after a few rings, her voice distracted, like I was interrupting something far more important. "Yes?" she said. "Mom," I whispered, already feeling tears rise in my eyes. "I need to talk to you." She sighed. "What is it now?" That hurt, but I pushed through it. I explained everything, the diagnosis, the surgery, the recovery time. I told her how scared I was, how vulnerable I felt. Then I finally said the words I had been holding back. "I need you and Dad to stay with the twins for a few days, just until I recover." There was silence on the line. Not the kind where someone is thinking, the kind where someone doesn't care enough to respond quickly. "Why can't you ask someone else?" she said finally. My throat tightened. "I don't have anyone else," I replied. "You're my parents." Another sigh, longer this time. "I'll talk to your father," she said. "We'll see." When the call ended, I stared at my phone, my heart pounding. Something felt wrong. Deep down, I already knew the answer. The next day, I drove to my parents' house, hoping that being there in person would change things. I told myself they couldn't say no when they looked into my eyes, when they saw how serious this was. We sat at the dining table where I had spent so much of my childhood. Everything looked the same. The walls, the furniture, even the smell of the house was familiar, but the warmth I remembered was gone. My father leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "So," he said, "you want us to babysit?" That single word felt like a slap. "They're your grandchildren," I said, trying to stay calm. My mother stared at the table. "We already raised our kids," she said flatly. "We're done." I felt my chest tighten. "I'm not asking forever," I said, "just for surgery and recovery." My father shook his head. "We have our own lives, plans, trips. We can't put everything on hold." I looked from one face to the other, searching for any sign of empathy. There was none. "Mom," I whispered, my voice breaking, "please." She finally looked at me, and her eyes were cold. "This is not our problem." Those words echoed in my head. Not our problem. As if my life meant nothing. As if my children were just an inconvenience. I stood up slowly, my legs trembling. "So if something happens to me," I asked quietly, "you won't even care what happens to them?" My father shrugged. "You should have planned better." I didn't say another word. I walked out, got into my car, and broke down. I cried until my chest hurt, until my vision blurred. In that moment, I realized something painful. I had been alone far longer than I thought. I was about to leave when my phone rang. "Come back inside," a calm voice said. I heard everything. It was my grandfather. When I stepped back in, he was standing in the living room, straight and steady. His eyes were sharp, filled with disappointment and anger. "You had no right to speak to her like that," he said to my parents. My father scoffed. "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me when family forgets who they are," Grandpa replied. Then he turned to me. "Sit down. You're not alone." For the first time in days, I felt seen. My parents shifted uncomfortably. Grandpa continued, his voice firm. "You turn your back on your own daughter when she needs you most, and you think there will be no consequences?" My mother tried to speak, but Grandpa raised his hand. "I'm not finished," he said. "You've made your choice." That night, something changed. I didn't know how yet, but I could feel it. Grandpa wasn't just angry, he was determined. And as I drove home later, one thought stayed with me. This wasn't just about my surgery anymore. It was about truth and justice. That night, sleep refused to come. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while my twins slept beside me, unaware that the people who were supposed to protect them had already chosen convenience over love. My parents' words kept replaying in my head, sharp and cold, cutting deeper each time I remembered them. Not our problem. The sentence felt unreal, like it belonged to someone else's life, not mine. But Grandpa's voice echoed too, calm, firm, different. For the first time since the diagnosis, I felt something other than fear. I felt a strange sense of safety, mixed with curiosity. Grandpa had never interfered much in family matters. He watched more than he spoke. When he did speak, people listened, and the look in his eyes that night told me he wasn't done. The next morning, my phone rang early. It was Grandpa. "Come over," he said. "We need to talk." I drove to his small guest house behind my parents' place. It was simple, modest, nothing like the main house. He had chosen to live there years ago, saying he preferred peace over space. Back then, I didn't understand what he meant. Now, I did. He poured me tea and gestured for me to sit. His movements were slow but steady, like a man who had lived long enough to understand patience. "I want you to tell me everything," he said, "not just about the surgery, about your life." And for the first time, I did. I told him about the nights I cried alone after my husband left, about working 2 jobs while raising twins, about how my parents always found reasons not to help, not just now, but always, how they smiled in public and disappeared in private, how I kept hoping they would change. Grandpa listened without interrupting. When I finished, my throat hurt, my eyes burned, and my hands were shaking. "They weren't always like this," he said quietly. I looked at him, confused. "They used to understand sacrifice," he continued, "but somewhere along the way, they forgot." He leaned forward slightly, and when people forget who helped them get where they are, life has a way of reminding them. I didn't know what he meant, but his words stayed with me. A few days later, Grandpa showed up at my apartment with a suitcase. "I'll stay with the twins," he said. "You focus on getting better." I froze. "What about Mom and Dad?" He smiled, but there was sadness in it. "They've made their choice." The surgery day came faster than I expected. As I lay on the hospital bed, holding my twins one last time before the nurses took me in, fear wrapped around my heart. But Grandpa squeezed my hand. "I'll be right here when you wake up," he said, and he was. Recovery was slow and painful. Some days I could barely move. Other days, the emotional pain was worse than the physical. But Grandpa never complained. He cooked, cleaned, played with the twins, and held my hand when I cried. Meanwhile, my parents didn't call, not once. Weeks passed, and then slowly, Grandpa began to act differently. He made phone calls in the evenings, stepping outside to talk. I could hear his voice through the door, calm but serious. When I asked him about it, he just said, old matters. One afternoon, my mother suddenly showed up at my door. She looked surprised to see Grandpa there. "We heard you had surgery," she said, her tone casual. "Why didn't you tell us it was serious?" I stared at her, stunned. Grandpa stood beside me. "You knew. You chose not to care." She looked uncomfortable. "That's not fair." "No," he replied. "What you did was." She left quickly, clearly shaken. Over the next few weeks, strange things started happening to my parents. Plans they were excited about fell apart. Trips were canceled. Friends stopped calling. Their social circles slowly faded. One evening, my father called me, his voice tense. "Do you know what's going on?" he asked. I honestly didn't, but Grandpa did. "They're learning," he said later, "what it feels like when support disappears." Then came the moment everything changed. My parents received a letter, legal papers. I wasn't there when they opened it, but Grandpa told me later. It informed them that certain financial arrangements they had relied on for years were ending. Investments, support they thought was permanent. They rushed to Grandpa, angry and confused. "This is your doing," my father accused. Grandpa looked at him calmly. "No, this is the result of choices you made long ago." They argued, they blamed, they pleaded, but Grandpa didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult them, he simply told them the truth. "You turned away from your daughter in her darkest hour, so now you'll face yours." When my parents came to me after that, their confidence was gone. Their voices were softer, their eyes avoided mine. "We didn't think it was that serious," my mother said. "We didn't mean to hurt you." I looked at them, really looked, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. I said, "You showed me who you are, and Grandpa showed me who family really is." They left without arguing. Weeks later, I fully recovered. Life didn't magically become perfect, but it became honest. My parents were distant, quieter, humbled by circumstances they never expected. Grandpa remained steady, loving, present. One evening, as my twins laughed in the living room, Grandpa sat beside me. "Revenge isn't about hurting people," he said softly. "It's about letting truth stand where lies once lived." I nodded, understanding at last, because sometimes justice doesn't shout. Sometimes it simply lets people feel what they chose to ignore. The house felt different after that. Not louder, not quieter, just honest. The kind of honesty that doesn't need words to explain itself. My parents stopped calling after that conversation, not because they were angry anymore, but because they didn't know what to say. For the first time in their lives, they were sitting with consequences they couldn't talk their way out of. They had always believed that blood alone gave them permanent importance. Grandpa had quietly shown them that respect and care were the real currency. As my strength slowly returned, I began to notice the small things Grandpa did without asking for praise. He woke up early to make breakfast for the twins, even when his knees hurt. He sat on the floor with them, letting them climb over him, laughing like the years had rolled backward. At night, when the pain hit me hardest, he would sit nearby, not speaking, just being there. One evening, when the twins were asleep, I finally asked him the question that had been sitting in my chest for weeks. "Did you plan all of this?" I asked softly. He didn't answer right away. He stared at his hands, worn and wrinkled, hands that had built businesses, raised children, and fixed mistakes when he could. "I didn't plan revenge," he said slowly. "I planned balance." I looked at him, confused. "When people believe they can take without giving, they grow careless," he continued. "Your parents forgot what support feels like because they've always had it. I simply stepped aside and let them feel the absence." That night, I understood something important. What Grandpa did wasn't cruel, it was fair. A few weeks later, my parents asked to see the twins. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no. Part of me wanted them to feel the same rejection they had handed me so easily. But another part of me, the part Grandpa had helped protect, wanted to act with strength, not bitterness. They came quietly. No big smiles, no excuses, just awkward silence and careful movements. My mother held one of the twins, her hands shaking slightly. My father stood back, unsure where he fit anymore. I didn't realize how much we depended on your grandfather, and how much we took you for granted. I didn't rush to comfort him. I didn't need to. I didn't ask for perfection. I asked for presence. They nodded. That was all they could do. They didn't suddenly become perfect grandparents. They didn't transform overnight, but they changed enough to matter. They stopped assuming access. They started asking. They learned that love doesn't survive entitlement. Months passed. My health returned fully. I went back to work, stronger than before. The twins grew louder, messier, happier. Grandpa moved more slowly now, but his smile came easier. One afternoon, I found him sitting alone, looking out the window. "You okay?" I asked. He smiled gently. "Just tired." I sat beside him, and for the first time, I saw the weight he had carried quietly for years. The mistakes he wished he had corrected sooner, the pride he had once placed in the wrong places. "You changed my life," I said. He shook his head. "No, you survived it. I just reminded you of your worth." Not long after that, Grandpa passed away peacefully in his sleep. The loss hurt in a way I can't fully describe, but there was no regret. He had said everything he needed to say. He had done everything that mattered. At the reading of his will, the truth settled fully. He hadn't left money as a reward or punishment. He had left lessons. Support went to those who showed up. Care went to those who cared. And responsibility followed choice. My parents didn't argue this time. They accepted it, quietly. Years later, when my twins are old enough to ask about their great-grandfather, I tell them the truth. I tell them he was a man who believed family wasn't proven by words, but by actions, that love means standing up when it's inconvenient, and that sometimes the strongest justice doesn't shout or strike back. Sometimes it simply steps aside and lets people face what they chose to ignore. That was Grandpa's lesson, and it changed everything.